Even with the vast progress being made as Myanmar opens up to the world, human rights remain a major concern in the former prior state. Violence between ethnic Rakhine Buddhists and Rohingya Muslims has surged over the past year in the country's west. Scores of people have been killed and an estimated 90,000 displaced. But in an interview with Newsline's Jim Middleton earlier this month, President Thein Sein said the international community misunderstood the facts. He said that violence in Rakhine State was criminal in nature rather than based on religion or ethnic background. The United Nations disagrees. Tomás Ojea Quintana is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on human rights situation in Myanmar. Mr. Ojea Quintana, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
You've made some pretty damning accusations recently against the Myanmar government, citing widespread and systematic human rights violations committed against the Rohingya in Rakhine State. Do you believe the government is serious about investigating allegations of human rights abuses?
It is clear that there is a lack of willingness in Myanmar to really address the widespread and systematic abuses against the Rohingya community in Rakhine State, particularly in northern Rakhine State. I have visited the area many times and I talked to many witnesses, and I also talked to the authorities, first to the local authorities in Rakhine State, but also then in Naypyidaw I talked to the national authorities, and I couldn't find a real framework to really address the abuses that has been committed against this community during the last month. The president of Myanmar decided to create some time ago an important commission, which I welcomed when it was created, and I also welcomed the recommendations of this commission, but I also point out the shortcomings in respect to the problem of investigating these abuses, because this brings then the question of impunity about abuses.
You've offered your support to the Myanmar government to address what you call the impunity which has enabled human rights violations to continue. Has the government shown any inclination to work with you on this?
The government is in the process of negotiating the opening of a human rights office in Myanmar, a United Nations human rights office. And this is important. At this moment, these negotiations are not bringing concrete results, but I understand that they are still in process. And I'm planning to visit Myanmar in August, next August, and of course this will be a very important point of my agenda.
A lot has changed in Myanmar in the last couple of years, and the international community has applauded the government for its progress and ongoing reforms. Do you believe this praise is warranted?
I really believe that we can say that there is a genuine and positive progress in Myanmar, and we should say this very firmly. There is progress, and I think in some areas the government is going in the right direction. Therefore, I think that the United Nations community, the international community, should commend this progress. Recently, the government of Myanmar and the KAO, the Kachin organization, has signed in principle a ceasefire agreement. And this is very important to reach peace in those border areas that has suffered the consequences of the war for many, many decades. These are the kind of decisions that we should commend. Also, the president of Myanmar has been releasing important number of political prisoners, many of whom I met in Myanmar when I visited Myanmar, and now I have the chance to meet them in freedom, and this is important. Many remain behind bars in Myanmar, and these political prisoners, all of them, deserve to be released immediately. So we need to support the decisions that the president has taken in the past, but we need to push for the release of all of them.
Earlier this month, President Thein Sein told this program the international community has misunderstood the facts and that much of the violence across the country is criminal in nature rather than about race or religion. Is this something you'd agree with?
What I believe is that this violence comes out from the decades of violence that the people of Myanmar have suffered under a military regime. This is a reproduction of the violence that the people suffered during the military regime. This is a violence that is being targeted to the weakest community in Myanmar, the Rohingya community, that they are not defending themselves. And this is the same pattern during the military regime, where the military committed a number of human rights abuses against ethnic communities, against monks who were peacefully demonstrating on streets. So this is a reproduction of the same pattern. I do not agree with those that say that this violence erupted now that there is a democracy. On the contrary, I think that this violence is the reproduction of the violence that the people have suffered in the past. And an important way to avoid this is to face justice, to face truth of what happened in the past.
We also asked the President about laws in the country that prevent many Rohingyas becoming citizens. He told us that some Rohingyas will be able to take up citizenship, but others are illegal immigrants. Is this correct?
The point is that most of this population, most of these Rohingya, have been living in that area for generations, and therefore they deserve the right to enjoy some kind of citizenship. We have hundreds of newborn children not being registered, for example, and there is a serious problem on this. I hope that during my next visit to Myanmar in next August, I will have the chance to really have a meaningful discussion with the authorities, with the Minister of Immigration, with the Minister of Home Affairs, sorry, in respect to how they are thinking to address the problem of citizenship with the Rohingya, because many of them deserve to be treated as citizens.
Well, you also bring up Myanmar's policy limiting Rohingya families to 2 children. What's your view of this policy? Do you believe it's discriminatory?
This is also against international human rights law. Myanmar has ratified the Convention Against Discrimination Against Women, and under this convention you will find a provision which says that every woman has the right to choose how many children will have in their life, and accordingly this is an obligation that the government needs to respect. Therefore, as a human rights envoy, my obligation is to stress, to point out that this policy is not in accordance with the Myanmar obligations.
Just finally, are you concerned about claims that the Thai military is involved in trafficking?
I cannot say much more about that because I really don't have information in this respect. What I can say is that some of the problems that the armed conflict in border areas brought in the past, some of them are still present, like the use of anti-personnel landmines, and the problems that the villagers face in terms of being facing the violence of the military going into the villages, for example. This is something that we need to pay attention, because while the ceasefire talkings are going on and the peace talkings are going on, the villagers are still facing the consequences of what happened in the past and what is still is happening in some parts at this moment.
Mr. Ojea Quintana, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
You're very welcome.